Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Gerchow. He is the Chief Security Officer over at Sumo Logic. George, it's great to have you with us in studio. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Jill, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And you are one of our first guests that we have had back in person since March 13th, 2020.
Wow.
So speaking of that, let's talk about the pandemic and some of the talent gaps that were exposed in the technology sector, cybersecurity in particular.
Well, I think, when everyone went remote, like just trying to get everyone to stay engaged, to learn how to manage a remote workforce outside of maybe VPNs, because like our company is 100% cloud-based and a lot of others are as well too. And so most of the time, I think people were so used to like managing those VPN connections, managing a perimeter type shop, that a lot of it was exposed. All of a sudden, what do you do when people are going right to the cloud?
Right. So what's interesting is you have been in an operating environment like we saw over the past 18 months, but it's always been like that.
Always been like that.
Right, right. So it's interesting, being in a cloud environment, you also think that when it comes to cybersecurity, we should take a more human-centric approach. That sounds a little bit counterintuitive, so tell me what you mean by that.
What I mean is just being transparent, open and honest, and approachable. When I came up in security, it was crazy how when you saw a security person coming towards you, you ran.
Right.
You wanted nothing to do with them. And the reason why is because you were gonna get in trouble or you were gonna get told no. When you make it an environment where you're approachable and transparent, people will self-report, and that's the best security tool on the planet, is having someone say, hey, I just inadvertently shared some data.
Right, we know it's really interesting because we think of all of the cybersecurity plays that are in place right now, but it does come down to the end of the day of the end user also being accountable.
It does, 100% truth right there. I mean, I think that people typically want to do the right things. People don't make mistakes to make mistakes or are bad actors just to be bad actors when it comes to end users in a company. But you have to have an environment to where they can speak up, they can feel safe, they can feel comfortable, and that really helps out tremendously.
Right, and it's so interesting because when you think about phishing that comes through our emails now, and I'm talking to someone who's definitely a very lay tech person, they look so real. Text messages that you get to your phone calls that come in. We kind of work with technology, but people from, older generations or even younger generations who have just not been exposed to it before, it looks so real.
It is getting even more real with deep fakes. So deep fakes now are taking on voice recognition patterns, like you said, phone calls, to where it sounds like the person. So like instead of getting an email saying, Ramin wants you to send X number of dollars being our CEO, which is a phishing attack that happens all the time. Now you could actually get a phone call or a message that sounds like him, and that's scary.
Yeah, so what do you advise people to do? If you get a phone call, if you get something that looks like a corporate email, if it looks like something that's coming from your banking account, sometimes I'll get text messages and it looks exactly the way you would think it would look, but with Chase, what I use, you could tell when it comes from Chase versus those 6-digit numbers. What do you do? If you're unsure, just don't respond back?
Over communicate, ask for help. So we have like a Slack channel to tell the SOC, we have an email thread tell the SOC, over communicate, and I think shops got to be ready for that kind of support to folks out there. The best thing to do is raise your hand and say, I feel like this is funny, and then not have any judgment back to those end users.
And you think that the future technology will see convergence of security and observability? Is that going back to everything that you were just talking about now?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's actually going to be a convergence of IT as well, too. So one of the trends that I'm seeing a lot, Jill, is that IT is now starting to report into security versus what used to happen where security reported into IT. Why? Well, availability really matters, but it has to be secure when it's available. When it comes to observability, I just need to understand all the different components as I'm rolling out a workload and where the breakdown could happen from an availability perspective and a security perspective.
Now that's really interesting because the roles of CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and Chief Security Officer have always been separate. What does that look like now? Do you think they'll still remain separate roles, or are they going to form into some sort of hybrid role?
I think it's going to be a hybrid role.
Right.
Like for example, myself now, so I have IT, and I'm lucky enough to support and serve those folks, as well as facilities rolling into security. Very different. I think the CTO will still stay separate, but a CIO, I think they're going to start reporting into security.
Interesting. George, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.